Okay, welcome to the November 3rd final meeting of the Pinellas County Redistricting Board. My name is Brian Unkst. I'll ask the board members to introduce themselves along with the staff. Starting to my right, Mr. Everett.
Thank you. I'm James Everett.
Mary Louise Ambrose.
Mark Weinkrantz.
Johnny Boykins.
Wade Vose, your attorney.
Chris Ruppel.
Bruce Livingston.
Allison Null.
Dr. Karen Owen.
Ron Schultz.
Newly married Esther Matthews.
Oh, congratulations, Esther. That's excellent. Very good. Our first agenda item is to approve the minutes of the October 27th, 2021 meeting. Did the members have an opportunity to review the minutes? And if so, are there any additions or corrections? If not, do I have a motion to approve?
Chairman?
Yes.
Actually, it's my understanding we don't have those minutes available at this time. What we were going to ask actually with respect to the minutes of the last meeting, since the plan is this is your final meeting tonight, that the practice in Pinellas County has been that that minutes for final meetings and close to final meetings would go to the county attorney's office and just be reviewed to confirm that it comports with what happened in the meeting and then be approved administratively.
Is everyone okay with that procedure?
That's fine.
Very good.
As long as there's a chance to read them and provide input.
Will you all make sure the board members get a copy of those minutes via email, and then we'd be able to provide email responses?
Absolutely.
Okay, very good. Let's go to public comment. We have two members in the room that would like to provide public comment. You'll have 3 minutes each, and then I'll ask if there's anyone virtually that would like to comment. The first one is Mr. Joseph Barkley. Mr. Barkley, are you here? You'll have 3 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Joseph A. Barkley III, address 2167 Lanai Avenue, Bel Air Bluffs, Florida 33770. As you will recall, I previously stated that I have concerns about the fact that the 2020 census was curtailed early, with the result that there was a dramatic undercount. Therefore, I urge you to avoid excessive manipulation of the data and use the simplest maps possible. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Estock, you'll be next. Are you here?
I wanted to speak on an agenda item.
Okay, on item 3, or item 4A. Got it. We'll wait for that item. Are there any members, Mr. Lowak, from the public who are joining virtually who'd like to make a comment at this time?
No one's attending virtually, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 4A, which is a follow-up from Mr. Spitzer on our direction at the last meeting to consider alternatives to make sure that as many municipalities are contained within a single-member district as possible. Specifically, we had concerns about Seminole that was split between 3 districts and Largo. And I also believe there was a small portion of Tarpon Springs, although that was in the at-large district. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Spitzer. If you could present to us on agenda item 4A, then we'll take public comment from Mr. Estock, and then we'll have comment from the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me try to share my screen here. There we go. So we at the last meeting, you discussed the fact that there are some cities that are split by, in this case, single-member district boundaries. The blue lines that you see are the current boundaries. And so it was 2 areas in Largo up here, a couple of areas in Seminole and 1 down here, and then this area here along the southern area of Pinellas Park. And you asked that alternatives be developed, which are in your packet. They're called alternative like 1A, 2A, 3A, which have been redrawn so that these areas here where a city is split, even though it's in a minor manner, they are no longer split. And if you look at your table of statistics, you will see that adjusting the boundaries so that cities are not split does cause the deviations to be greater than the basic alternative maps 1, 2, and 3, and greater, by the way, than the existing district boundaries. But it's still well within acceptable tolerances. It still is, I believe, in all of the plans, 1A, 2A, 3A, the tolerances are still, the spread between the largest and the smallest district remains at 5 percentage points, maybe a little bit less than that. So it's an acceptable alternative if you wish to pursue this. And let me show where how this would work here. So here, using this area adjacent to Largo as an example, if we look at an alternative here, this area here would be moved from District 6 into District 5. These are the only parts of the city that are bisected by this line here, but this is an area, I believe the county jail might be here. There's other sorts of non-residential uses, and there's not a lot of people that actually live here. This is a very good, easily understood boundary here. And so what we did was to move this over to District 5 there. In this example here, there are in fact no people that live here. Over here, there's 158 people that live in this whole area here, but it's just a nicer boundary to move this over into District 5.
Mr. Spitzer, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if we were looking at alternative 2A, where you've got those blocks kind of called out, would that be consistent with what you're presenting now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just for
That's
board
correct.
members, if you're looking at alternative 2A, you can kind of see the areas that Mr. Spitzer's talking about.
Well, in fact, in all of the A versions, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, in terms of the boundaries between District 5, 6, and 7, it's identical.
Okay.
It's all the same. And so there's about 158 people that live here, and so this total move was adding 158 people into District 5. Here, in the sort of the northeast edge of the city of Seminole, a little bit of a different picture. There's 1,000, maybe 1,300 or 1,400 people that live in this area here that would go from District 5 into District 6. Moving on down to the southeast tip of Seminole, in this area here, there's 29 people that live here that would go from District 7 into District 6. So not a significant number of people. Then moving to the Kenneth City, Lellman sort of area here, this is the current boundary here. The question was this portion of Pinellas Park, should that remain in District 7 or should it be added with the rest of the city into District 6? And so excuse me, wrong button. To have a consistent line here, we had to go a little bit farther. We went over the city of Kenneth City, but took this area here and moved it over. And that was a little bit more than 2,100 people there. I might note that the African-American population of this area is slightly smaller in terms of percent than the African-American population of District 7. And so moving this area out of 7 into 6 does slightly improve the percent of African-American people that live in District 7. But all of these options, I think, are options that you could consider. I think that the charter directs you to consider, where feasible, following municipal boundaries, and this is exactly what we're doing right now. But it's not an absolute direction, and generally speaking, I think in fact the existing boundary lines do a very good job of not splitting cities, obviously with the exception of St. Petersburg and Clearwater, which is unavoidable. You cannot avoid splitting those two cities. So this is what was done here in the A maps, and if you have any further questions, I'm happy to try to respond to them.
Okay, so Mr. Spitzer, if I'm understanding this right, there's no alternative 1A, there's alternative 2, there's 1, 2, 3, and there's 2A and 3A. So if we're looking at, yes, sir.
In your packet, that's correct, Mr. Chair. We were sort of under the gun to get this packet ready in a couple of days after your last meeting. And we did not prepare a 1A map, but there are statistics in your packet on 1A, and the changes to the boundaries between District 5 and 6 and 6 and 7 are identical to what you're seeing here in 2A or also in 3A.
Yes, sir. So if I look at, for example, the data for alternative 2 and 3, and then I compare that to the data for alternative 2A and 3A, that will demonstrate to the board members the impact in terms of the distribution of population, the equality of distribution of population versus the priority of maintaining more municipal boundaries within the single-member districts. So it appears like alternative 2 and 3 have the same, deviations between plus 1.4% and minus 1.7% for 2, plus 1.4% and minus 0.07% for 3. And then if we went to 2A and 3A, which prioritize the municipal boundaries being retained, you go between plus 2.9% and minus 1.7% for 2A, and 2.9% plus to minus 1.6% for 3A. So you'd be looking at about 4.6%, 4.5% deviation between the most populous single-member district versus the least, which our understanding is that is still acceptable under the law in terms of the priorities in the charter, just so we're all clear on the implications of either of those choices. Open up to the board for questions before we take public comment. Yes, Dr. Owens.
Yes, I'd like to just say, first of all, making these changes and presenting them to us the last night when we haven't had a chance to see these at the last meeting really doesn't give us enough time to look at this comprehensively. I think these types of changes are confusing to the voting public. I think making these types of changes makes it really hard for voters to know, oh, now I'm going to be voting in a different district. I think it's confusing to the public. I don't think these changes are necessary, And I think the fact that we only have tonight to look at them and that here they are, these are brand new to us, I don't think there's enough time to consider this. And I move that these not be considered for a change.
So you're making a, well, I mean, I think for agenda item 4, it's kind of the follow-up matters, and then agenda item 5 would be consideration of the district. So I don't know if it's appropriate now to make a motion on throwing anything out just yet, although I'll defer to Mr. Voss on parliamentarian rules if I need to consider the motion since it's been laid on the table.
I believe a motion to that would be in order under item 5.
Item 5, is that okay, Dr. Owen?
Yes.
Thank you, and we will definitely come back to that, so appreciate it. The other thing I'd like to point out too, and we did discuss this, is that municipalities they file annexations on a regular basis. And I know, for example, the city of Largo has it in their comprehensive plan that they want to aggressively annex where appropriate to increase their municipal jurisdiction. And so these, you know, some of these enclaves that we see where there's unincorporated right next to incorporated, I mean, those are going to persist. Municipalities are going to continue to annex and grow. And so even if we get all of the municipalities, we're not going to get them all, but even if we get most of the municipalities into one district, nothing is going to stop those municipalities from expanding their boundaries into other districts as soon as these maps are approved. So, you know, just from a practical perspective, I think that's important for us to also consider and to realize that, you know, these municipal boundaries are not set in stone. They change all of the time. Mr. Weinkrantz, you had a comment or a question.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to look at these 2A and 3A, and I'm just going to call these the cleanup agenda items here, where we respect the integrity of the municipalities. Between the 2A and 3A, do we have a model here that just makes all the changes? Because our purpose here is to make recommendations to the county commissioners. I mean, we could present every single one of these to them for their final decision, but I'm just wondering if we have something that incorporates all the municipality changes that we can say, yes, we're in favor of putting that in front of the county commission.
Mr. Spitzer, do you understand the question? I think that's directed to you.
Okay, well, yes, I think I do. And I think if your policy objective is to ensure, at least for the time being, that not all of the cities, but as many cities as is possible are contained within particular single-member districts. That occurs in the 1A, 2A, 3A maps. Other parts of the 1A, 2A, 3A maps, or the alternatives 1, 2, and 3, the original 1, 2, and 3, make other different changes, not in this, you know, in the central part of the county. They make changes up in this particular area here. Remember where one map was, at your direction, was to move Clearwater Beach into District 5 and then offset that population gain by moving some of the countryside area from District 5 to District 4. And then another alternative was to move this portion of District 4 into 5 and then further continue this line. I believe it was along Sunnyland Road.
Sunset Point, yeah.
Sunset, thank you very much.
Sunset Point, yes, sir.
But Mr. Spitzer, what I'm speaking specifically to is the municipalities, to make them whole. It seems like it's a fairly small tweak that, as the chairman pointed out, doesn't go outside the deviations allowable. And one of our directives is to try and keep the municipalities whole. And while we can't do it for St. Peter Clearwater, it looks like a small fix here for Kenneth City and so on, just to go ahead. Do I have a single alternative to offer to the county commission that incorporates those changes for those smaller municipalities?
Yes, sir. Any of the alternative A maps, any of those 3 A alternatives will do that.
Okay.
They make other changes, but in terms of bringing as many portions of municipalities into individual single-member districts, they do that. And I think that, I think one thing that might be worthwhile considering is you know, do you want to give one recommendation to the county commission or two or three?
Right.
And if it's more than one, should one be a priority? Or just hand two or three off to the county commission and that's that. You know, you might want to think about, if it's multiple recommendations, you might want to think about prioritizing them.
So in answer to my question, we don't have, because these are alternatives to 2 and 3, and that's why they're the alphas, there is no specific map drawn up that does nothing but make the municipalities whole. We don't have that as an
I'm sorry, I
alternative.
see what you're saying.
If the only changes we made,
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Although those kinds of changes could be made as long as in terms of notice and things like that, you could do those changes to the existing districts.
okay, thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Spitzer at this time before we get to public comment? No? Okay. Mr. Estock, would you like to comment at this time? You will have 3 minutes, sir.
Good evening. I'm John Patrick Estock. Good point, Mr. Weinkratz. I wish there had been, I was looking forward to this, seeing these alternatives. I wish there had been one that kept the status quo with these single-member districts, but that just made the tweaks to the municipal boundaries. But we don't have that. The tweaks only go to the changes with putting Clearwater Beach and Island Estates and that whole thing. And that's always seemed to be the priority. It's not a priority of mine. If I had a policy recommendation to make to the county commission, it would be to make as much of Clearwater whole. I would be willing to, the islands, Clearwater Beach, Island Estates, and Cian Key could go to District 4 and put Countryside and as much as mainland Clearwater into District 5, along with the other, keeping the single-member districts. So that's just what I would say. It's not that big of a deal, and I still think Alternative 3 or Alternative 3A is the worst. I would never vote for that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Estock. Any other comments or questions before we move on from item 4A? Okay, Mr. Vos, we did ask you to provide kind of a refresher on our kind of order of priority in terms of the charter. I believe that's in your packets under final report adoption, relevant excerpts from Pinellas County Charter and CRB additional operating rules.
I
Yes.
did have one more comment.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, again, I don't feel that we've been given sufficient time to review these alternatives. They've just been presented to us tonight. Alternative 1A, 2A, and 3A, there hasn't been enough time for us, and I've not been provided with the shape files to be able to do any kind of an analysis, so.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vos, will you walk us through the charter provisions as it relates to what we are directed to do and our priorities in terms of what we're supposed to be recommending to the commission, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. And gentlemen, in the back, if you could put up that PDF we discussed previously. Just want to have it in front of you all as well. As the chairman mentioned, he asked just very briefly, circle back around to the beginning and give you all a reminder of some of the pieces that are particularly in the charter. Mr. Spitzer has done an outstanding job in explaining to you both the general parameters that we take into account when you're engaging in redistricting and the particulars with regard to the requirements of the charter that bind the work of this board. But we did just want to address it one last time for the public and for the record. The Redistricting Board is charged to develop one or more, and we've discussed that, one or more proposals for redistricting the 4 single-member commission districts and 3 at-large districts. In developing the County Redistricting Board's proposals, no district shall be drawn with the intent, that's the important word there, with the intent to favor or disfavor a political party or an incumbent. And I will share with you, we've had brief discussion concerning this matter. The discussion that has been on the record here with regard to that, I think, has evidenced very well that there has not been discussion down those lines. Further, the districts, in developing your proposals, the districts shall not be drawn with the intent or result. You'll note the distinction there, and that really gets at what the current law is with regard to this issue. Not be drawn with the intent or result of denying or abridging the equal opportunity of racial or language minorities to participate in the political process or to diminish their ability to elect representatives of their choice. And as you know, there's been discussion with regard to some of the numbers here and from Mr. Spitzer related to that issue. Further, the districts must be contiguous and nearly equal in population as practicable. And as Mr. Spitzer's indicated, that's not perfect equality in numbers, but what is practically able within tolerances he's discussed. In addition, as you all have discussed, in developing proposals, the County Redistricting Board shall consider, where feasible, utilizing municipal boundaries and keeping together unincorporated areas of the county. As has been suggested previously in our discussions, while that is a directive of matters to consider utilizing, it is not a hard first-tier rule, if you will, that it is a compulsion on you that you must follow that. But it's certainly, you are asked to consider it where feasible. Finally, you are required, pursuant to the charter language, of course, not drafted in contemplation of the census being delayed for months and months by a global pandemic, within 150 days after your first meeting, you submit a final report containing your redistricting proposals to the Board of County Commissioners. That is from the charter with regard to your work. Further, as you all recall, you all adopted some additional operating rules, and one of those that we discussed and that you all approved was a requirement that an affirmative vote of the majority of the full membership, and so that would be an affirmative vote of 6 members, is required for final approval of the final report. So that all collapses in the same thing here because we have a full board here, which is a happy thing. So that is the vote that will be required tonight to finally approve a final report that will be transmitted to the Board of County Commissioners. And I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Vos? Dr. Owen?
Yeah, will there be one vote on one map? Will there be multiple votes on multiple maps?
That's a great question. And that is a discussion I imagine you all are going to be having very shortly when, after you have your discussion about the various alternatives, you start to get a feel amongst yourselves how many different maps you might end up doing. And I'm glad to offer my advice and some suggestions along those lines when we get there. It's really kind of going to depend on what it's sounding like the direction of the board is with regard to how many maps you all may be looking at.
Let me throw something out for discussion. So the way we did it the last meeting was we handled single member districts first, and then we handled the at-large districts second. So I think that keeps that organized. And I'm open to whatever the board would like to do, but I certainly think that we have established that the current districts are acceptable, allowable under the law, and that the commission should have the option to retain those districts. I think it's also something that I'm hearing from members of the public and from some board members at the last meeting that they are very interested in trying to put some of these municipal boundaries more into single-member districts. And so we could also, in line with saying you keep the current districts, we could say you could also explore keeping the current districts but trying to move those areas of Seminole, Largo, Kenneth City, into one district rather than another. And then we can talk about these individual proposals, 1, 2, 3, alternative 2A, alternative 3A, and whether we actually want to propose those or not. I don't want to micromanage the discussion. And it sounds like, some board members have some very important concerns. And I think that a lot of the board members and members of the public had other concerns at the last meeting. I also want to note, obviously we are in a time crunch, and that was recognized in the Tampa Bay Times before we even started our work, not as a result of any fault of our own or of the staff, but as a result of the census data and the legal timeframe that the county commission has to approve these things. So this is an ongoing process. We're an advisory board. We're not eliminating any options from the county commission in terms of the county commission can go with something totally different than what we propose. So that gives me comfort knowing that we've done a lot of work here and we've got some work product to talk about, but that the county commission ultimately will have additional time, and we all will have additional time to look at this stuff, even outside of the context of being on the board and continuing to comment on it. So having said all that, can we move on to item 5 and we'll start talking about the single member districts? Okay, Mr. Spitzer, since you have provided us with alternative 1, 2, 3, 2A, and 3A, I will turn it over to you to kind of give us an overview of those, and then I'll open it up to the board for discussion if that's okay.
Mr. Chair, before I get into the alternatives, let me remind the board that in both the existing single-member district plan and the at-large residence area districts, there were 2 or 3 blocks along boundary lines whose shapes had been changed by the Bureau of the Census. And so if, for example, if you wanted to recommend that no change be made, my recommendation to you would be that that means no changes are made to the existing boundaries except for following a couple of minor changes to boundaries due to changes in block shapes that were along the boundaries between District 4 and 5 and 5 and 6. And I can illustrate that to you now.
That's the housekeeping adjustments map, the first large map we have.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And without the populations in those blocks, the block in the countryside area, most of that block was within District 5, and so we moved, for the purposes of calculating the population of the district, we moved all of that population into District 5. And on the boundary between 5 and 6, all of that population got moved into District 6. And so if this was the only thing that you were going to recommend, I would advise that you would want to include these 2 minor, almost housekeeping changes as part of that and make appropriate changes to the boundaries. So that said, the first alternative moved the city of Clearwater Beach, Clearwater Beach into the city of Clearwater. And Clearwater Beach is part of the city of Clearwater. And so that was the change there. To offset that particular population, there were some changes that were made in bringing this boundary here down a little bit lower. Now, I might note that one of the census block issues was in this area up here. This plan and the other plans makes that issue moot because the boundary is moved far away from where that census block had been that now bisected the existing district boundaries. So that's one alternative. The other alternative also begins with a moving of Clearwater Beach into District 5, but this boundary line here, this is a current boundary, is more or less continued in an easterly manner along Sunset Point Road. And one of the criteria in the redistricting process is try to have districts that are as compact as possible. This is a more compact district. This population in District 4, that right here, is moved into District 5. Then this population and going north is moved from District 5 into District 4. And you can see the statistics that reflect the changes there. The third alternative, which was discussed at your last meeting, was to take a different approach to the sort of the northern half of Pinellas County, and that is to intentionally have the two districts in the northern end of the county follow a north-south pattern, so that most of the unincorporated area in this part of the county is now split between two different districts. And so that's what this plan does here. It follows, I believe this is Keene Road, and then goes up 19 and goes through Lake Tarpon up to the northern tip of the county. So that's what that change is here. The nomenclature hasn't been changed, to reflect what particular districts, which district is which one. Is the western part District 4 and the eastern part District 5, or vice versa? That is a matter of discretion to the county commission. I haven't talked to your council about this, but this is a redistricting board. I think that's something that you could consider in terms of your recommendation were you to move with this particular plan. I'll note that in the at-large districts, the district on the western side is an even number district. You might want to consider, making this particular district District 4 and this one over here District 5. So those are the three primary plans. Then there are alternative plans as well. And the 1A plan is very similar to the A plan that we just discussed a little while ago, but corrects these changes here that we were talking about earlier, so that cities are no longer split by district boundaries. And so this makes these changes around the Kenneth City, Lellman area. I think this is Bay Pines, other parts of the city of Seminole, and then other changes that we discussed earlier. And the statistical ramifications of this are in the Excel spreadsheets that you can see in your packet.
Mr. Spitzer, can we back up for a second?
Sure.
Yeah, we're covering a lot of material. So for alternatives 1 and 2 for District 4 and 5, I did some analysis. You thankfully provided me the shapefiles for this, and basically the alternatives and the existing districts already do split up the city of Clearwater. So even if we were to choose alternative 1 or 2 for District 4 or 5 changes, we're still splitting up Clearwater, and Clearwater already is split up in the existing districts. So that doesn't follow with any, mandate or desire on the part of the board to keep municipalities together and compact. I was looking at some of these changes in the data, and I can see that northern part of District 5 that is blue, it kind of juts up. That is the Countryside Country Club community area. So that's what that represents. And let's see, what else did I figure out? So the existing District 4 does include Clearwater Beach, correct?
It does, yes.
Yeah, it does.
And Island Estates.
Yeah, yeah. So both of these alternatives include Clearwater Beach. And that, I just wanted to point out, that's what that area is. It's an affluent area of a country club community right up there in that northern part. Alternative 2 also includes that country club community plus a mixed community that extends south of the country club and goes down to Sunset Point Road, and then it's bordered on the west by 19 and on the east by McMullen Booth. And if you were to add this portion for alternative 2, you're now also including the Capri Mobile Home Park, which is 119 mobile homes. You're including Regency Oaks Retirement Community, which is about 500 people, independent and assisted, and a geographic area of mostly single-family homes. So that's kind of a mixed, if you add that, that is a mixed area, mixed residential area. So, and I just wanted to point out both of those alternatives that we have here before us, alternative 1 and 2, exclude Clearwater Beach, which is now included in District 4.
Correct, yeah, and I think we've talked about that a lot, going back to our organizational meeting. Right now, District 4 and 5 have kind of a unique split along Countryside Boulevard. So Countryside goes all the way up to Curlew Road and 19, and Curlew Road and McMullen Booth Road. And so if you live in Countryside and you live west of Countryside Boulevard, you're in District 4, and if you live east of Countryside Boulevard, you're in District 5, which is, probably among the current districts, at least in the single-member districts, one of the most kind of unusual demarcations. And I think we've talked about it and obviously open up for discussion, but I've not been a huge fan of alternative 1 just because I don't think it really does a whole lot to correct that. I think that if we wanted to consider District 4 North County and we wanted to just consider District 5 Mid County, it would make sense to go with alternative 2 as a proposed alternative, not to say it's the best plan or what they should do. But in my view, if we were going to make a recommendation along the lines of alternative 1, we might as well just go with alternative 2 because I think it keeps communities of interest more together geographically, and it makes more sense from a geographic shape-wise to me. So if I were going to be, voting on alternative 1 or 2, I would prefer alternative 2 to alternative 1. Understanding that, like we've said the whole time, we can also recommend they just keep them the same. We can recommend they keep them the same. We can recommend they consider alternative 2. If we want to address that now, any other thoughts on that in terms of alternatives 1 versus alternative 2? What we think, Mr. Livingston?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think if we're just discussing, pros and cons or one versus the other, I would go along with your comments on 1 and 2, and my preference would be alternative 2.
So I guess, Mr. Vos, let me ask you a question, and well, it's board, because we can do this however you want. Do you want to make a motion, if someone wants to make a motion now to create, let's create our list. If you could make a motion now to say we'd like to propose to the county commission that they can consider keeping the districts the way they are, and that would go on our list. It doesn't seem like there's much controversy with that recommendation. And so I think just to get the ball rolling, we can start the motions and the discussions with that. And then, of course, there's the caveat that Mr. Weinkrantz raised of, do you want to caveat it with, but try to make those tweaks to the cities where appropriate? I guess that's where it goes to discussion. And you're free to make a motion at any time, so. Mr. Weinkrantz.
If I could, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think our role here is to put the options in front of the county commission. I don't expect, of course, it's the will of the majority here, that we would come up with a single recommendation. My list, if we're talking about it, would be a no change list, alternative 1, alternative 2, and no change except for making the municipalities whole. I would really like to see, that would be, if I had to rank order them, that would be my number one, would be to go ahead and make the small fixes here. There's nothing pressing. We did not have a huge change in any populations, and we don't need to make this more complicated than it is. So we have had some feedback from the public. There has not been an outcry that people have felt unrepresented in the county, which is, I look at it as a positive. But if we can make the small tweaks and stay within the guidelines of the charter, and what Mr. Spitzer tells us is within that tolerance, I would definitely like to see the municipalities made whole as much as possible.
All right, let's do it this way.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion to put on the recommendation list the current single-member districts with the housekeeping adjustments, which is your first map?
So moved.
Dr. Owen makes the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on that? Any members of the, yes, Ms. Ambrose.
Yeah, I have more an explanation of why I feel that going to the maps that are in place now are the better choice. And I understand the caveats made. But all the maps are based on population, which is used as our first priority. This is made difficult because sufficient time was not allowed for counting population, especially minority population, which is usually the last to be counted. This was caused by several things. COVID was clearly a limitation on the count. The addition of the early time cutoff resulted in an undercount of minorities, and also the attempt to add a question, which was feared by some minorities, limited responses. The result is that we really do not have a good minority count. When Mr. Barkley questioned the population numbers, the answer that was given to, that were given to him was that we have what we have and we have to work with what we have, and that was the correct answer. There was no other choice. Now, just for the record, Mr. Barkley happens to be my husband. I have some other concerns concerning the guidelines for the fair districts, but the above inadequate population count does not allow me to go farther. A personal priority for me is to guard against the dilution of minority voting strength. I believe that the maps already in use are badly gerrymandered, but the maps offered here are inadequate because of the problems mentioned above. It's clear to me that the count of minority population is based on inadequate population numbers, and since the population numbers are the priority we are directed to use here, I cannot consider the maps. So my vote would be to just leave things as they are, as much as I dislike the maps that we have. I think the ones we're kind of working in the dark, especially as far as minorities are concerned.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ambrose. Before we vote, I just wanted to, we have talked about the efficacy of the census data, which obviously is not something that any of us or the county staff were involved with formulating or conducting. Mr. Spitzer, Mr. Vos, are any of the options that we're considering resulting in diluting minority votes or minority access to representation? Because if they are, we should not consider them. I just want to put that out there and make sure the answer to that question is no, they do not.
Well, based on the census data that we have, the answer is no. The census, we've talked about this a couple of meetings ago. The data is the best that we have at the present time, and it was received. This census was received very late in the process. It was due March 31st. We finally received it in mid-August, which was, in fact, a lot earlier than what the Bureau of the Census had told us when we were going to receive it, which was the end of September. So we did get it a little bit earlier than their revised deadline, but still very late. Had it been received a little bit earlier, we might have had some more time to work with it and sort of test it out a little bit. But this data is presumed to be correct. People, I'm sure might challenge it, but it's the best data that we have at the present time.
And Mr. Vos, are there any legal challenges that you know of that would impact the quality of the data?
I'm not aware of any challenges with respect to data in the state of Florida.
Okay.
I seem to recall there may be some challenge or another, maybe in Alabama or something, but I'm not even sure that it's going to the same issues that are being addressed here. I can't speak to the future, but there's nothing under challenge in Florida right now.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Ambrose, I saw your hand.
Yeah, just to restate what I said, we don't know that we have good minority count and population. In fact, there are good reasons why we probably do not. And for that purpose, that is why I feel that just leaving the maps as they are, as poor as they are, is probably the best result.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, Mr.
Mr.
Weintraub.
Chairman, you've had a first and a second on the item that you introduced, the current single-member districts with housekeeping adjustments.
Yes, sir.
I just suggest we call the vote on
Yeah, I
that
just was,
particular
I was
item.
giving everyone an opportunity to comment on the motion before we call for a vote. Any other comments on the motion?
I'd like to just add to what Mr. Spitzer said with respect to your comment regarding are we potentially diluting minority voting strength, and we really don't have enough information to make a really good scientific analysis of that. We know people self-identify in the census. That's what we have. We don't know whether they are citizens. We don't know whether they're registered to vote. So, this is what we have to work with. So I guess what I'm saying is without significant more detailed statistical analysis, it would be very difficult to answer the question if we are diluting minority voting strength.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Livingston.
Mr. Chair, this is just more of a matter of deliberation. I'm certainly, as we take these proposals forward, we want them to be meaningful to the county commission. So I think as we deliberate, I would just ask the board, are we going to prioritize 1, 2? Do we need to indicate basically how many proposals we intend to bring forward? That may help us in our deliberations in terms of prioritization.
I think the easiest way to do it, unless the board disagrees, is let's make a recommendation list first based on, discussion of these proposals we have. And then if we want to talk about prioritizing one of the over the other, we can do that after the list is created. Is that acceptable to everyone? Okay. Yes, Ms. Null.
Are we at a point then where we wouldn't want to make any dramatic changes like alternative 3 and 3A? Can we toss those?
We
or
haven't
no?
gotten there just
We
yet.
have to
So
go
my
fast.
plan is to go through each of these individually and have a discussion and vote on each one. And we don't have to, if you don't want to recommend one, we don't have to have a vote on it. So if we get to 3 and we say we don't want to do 3, we don't even have to take a vote. Does that make sense? Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second, we've had discussion on recommending, including on the recommendation list, the current districts with the housekeeping adjustments. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Okay, that passes unanimously. Okay, moving on to alternative.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, it's me. Could you please repeat the motion in the second?
Yes,
for
Dr.
the record?
Owen made the motion, and I believe Mr. Rupel made the second.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Alternative 1 and 2, we've talked about a lot, and I don't know if we also want to talk about alternative 2A in the same discussion, or if we want to save 2A until we deliberate on 1 and 2.
I would
but
suggest we leave the 1, 2, and 3A to a separate discussion.
Okay, the A's will be a separate discussion. All right,
My concern is that there is no option here that has just the tweak for the municipalities. So does that mean because we haven't been prepared a document reflecting that we can't put that forward to the county commission?
No, I think we can certainly include that in our
Okay.
recommendation as an overall recommendation. I think we can do that for sure. So let's talk about alternative 1. Is there any motion to recommend alternative 1? If not, is there a motion to recommend alternative 2?
So moved.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Matthews.
I'd like to put a motion on the floor for alternative 1.
Okay, there's a motion to recommend alternative 1. Is there a second?
I'll make a second so we bring it to a vote.
Okay, any discussion on that? Again, I don't have a problem with recommending it. I prefer alternative 2, so I'll be voting for both, I guess. Any other comments? All in favor of recommending alternative 1, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay, so let's do the hands so the clerk can see that. Who voted yes for 1? Chair and vice chair. Who voted no for 1? Everybody else? Okay. All right, alternative 2. We've discussed alternative 2. Is there a motion to recommend alternative 2?
So moved.
Mr. Rupel makes the motion to recommend alternative 2. Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any other discussion or comments on alternative 2? All in favor say aye and raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand if you said aye, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, wait, 5?
No, need more.
6, okay. All right, and all opposed say nay and raise your hand. 2, 4, 5. Okay, 6 to 5.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Is there any way if everyone could do like say their name, like when they raise their hand, like go around?
Okay, let's start over.
Because I just for the record.
Sure, let's start over on alternative 2. For alternative 2, Mr. Everett. Mr. Everett says aye. Ms. Ambrose says no.
No.
Mr. Weinkrantz.
No.
Mr. Boykins.
No.
Mr. Rupel.
Yes.
Mr. Livingston.
Nay.
Miss Null, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Dr. Owen.
No.
Mr. Schultz. Yes. Vice Chair Matthews.
Yes.
And the chair is yes. And did you get that?
Yes.
Okay, is it still 6 to 5?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's recorded, so I can double check it.
Okay. Alternative 3 we have not discussed yet. Alternative 3 was the genesis of a recommendation of one of the commissioners identifying potential difficulty with representation of North County District 4 given the frequency of unincorporated areas. We saw it for the first time at the last meeting. Not to lead the conversation, but I think it got a lukewarm reception, to say the least. I'll open it up to questions to Mr. Spitzer or comments on alternative 3.
Who is the commissioner?
Commissioner Seal
Thank
said that she thought it should be considered. Not that she thought it was a good idea or that we should do it, but just that we should think about it. The current at-large districts are split that way, and she thought it was difficult for representation when you had a lot of unincorporated citizens who don't have underlying municipal governments to help support local needs, and you only have one commissioner. So that was the genesis of that conversation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, Dr. Owen.
Yeah, so I have a map in front of me of all of the unincorporated areas in Pinellas County, and they are everywhere. This northeast portion, I think that we're discussing here, is not that densely populated. However, there are many other unincorporated areas smattered throughout the county. So I tend to feel that concern is not as important as other concerns. So
Understood. Any other comments on 3? The more I thought about it, I don't like the fact it goes down Keene Road. I mean, it really splits Clearwater and Largo like in half. And I certainly don't think that's in line with what we're supposed to be recommending. I would be more comfortable with it if it went down US 19, because that would take care of that a little bit more, but then you'd have to go way further south, and then who knows what that would do to Feather Sound and those areas. So I'm not feeling particularly inclined to push for alternative 3. Does anyone want to make a motion? If we don't make a motion, it just dies and we move on. Okay, moving on. Ms. Ambrose, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. All right. Now we're going to alternative 2A. So this is alternative 2, except for with Kenneth City, Largo, and Seminole moved into the same single-member district. So it's the same thing as alternative 2, but with keeping the municipalities in the same district. Yes, Vice Chair Matthews.
Chair, Mr. Spitzer did say that he did not provide the map. However, the data for alternative 1A is in our. So are we not going to take that in consideration?
I'm sorry. That's a great point. So alternative 1A is alternative 1 with the municipalities put into the same single-member districts that we discussed, Kenneth City, Seminole, and Largo. Is there any discussion on 1A?
we did not support alternative 1 as one of the options
That
put
is correct.
forward. So 1A would kind of be a moot point, wouldn't it?
I think if someone wanted to make a motion to approve 1A, they'd be entitled to do that, and we could address it. Any other comments? Is there a motion for 1A? Okay, seeing none. Moving on to alternative 2A. Is there a motion related to alternative 2A?
I'd move to accept alternative 2A. Or
Mr. Livingston makes the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Rupel makes a second. Is there any discussion or comment on alternative 2A?
Yes, just that we're seeing this for the first time tonight, and I don't think there's significant enough time for us to actually evaluate this.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on 2A before we vote? Okay, all in favor of recommending alternative 2A, say aye and raise your, or actually, let's do the voice vote for the clerk. Mr. Everett on 2A? Nay. Ms. Ambrose?
Weinkrantz, nay.
Boykins, nay.
Mr. Rupel?
Yay, yes, board.
Mr.
Yes.
Livingston? Ms. Nall?
Yes.
Dr. Owen?
No.
Mr. Schultz?
No.
Vice Chair Matthews?
Yes.
And the chair is yes. That's 5 to 6 in the negative. So 2A will not be recommended. Okay? Alternative 3A. Again, we didn't have a motion to support 3, so I'm assuming there won't be a motion to support 3A. Okay? And just to keep us organized, so right now, we've got a recommendation list that includes keeping the single-member districts the way they are with the housekeeping adjustments and alternative 2. So those are the only recommendations we currently have as it relates to single-member districts. Mr. Weinkrantz.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And as I brought up before, I would like to suggest that we have, absent any other adjustments to the county map, that we just make the adjustments to bring the municipalities together, and that's not reflected on any map other than the alternatives.
Well, 2A would have done that.
If we accepted 2, if we accepted alternative 2, we can reject alternative 2 and just go with the municipalities. There's no standalone, is my...
But what we did was we accepted alternative 2 and we rejected alternative 2A.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But there's no option for the no change to the map and only addressing the municipality issue. But the way things are drawn up, these are what's presented to us, and we have not been provided with.
So what Mark is suggesting is that, I think, if I'm going to put this together, is
Go
you make
ahead.
a motion for the current single-member district with housekeeping and the municipality adjustments made in the other, in 3.
I understand that. Okay, so is there a motion in that regard?
I will make that motion, yes.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, so just to be clear, we're talking about the single-member districts as they are with housekeeping, incorporating the changes from the A alternatives, which would move Largo, Seminole, and Kenneth City into the same single-member districts. Is everyone on the same page?
And this is to offer a third alternative.
Yes, sir. Staff, does everybody know what we're talking about?
Yes.
So I've made a motion, and I guess we're waiting. Oh, I made a motion, and I guess we're waiting on a
I
second.
believe that Mr. Rupel seconded it.
Oh,
Or no,
thank you
or-
so much.
or
And thanks
Mr.
for the
Schultz.
clarification.
Yes,
Yeah,
Dr. Owen.
I just, so we're still split, Clearwater, the city of Clearwater is still split up regardless.
As is
of-
St. Petersburg.
As is St. Pete, so you're really just talking about a couple of the municipalities,
Very
not all
small
of them.
changes as outlined on 2A.
And
Vice Chair.
I did not actually second that. I was just clarifying what he was saying.
Okay.
Mine was not a second.
Okay. Just for sake of clarity and record keeping, this wouldn't be the third alternative. This would be the fourth
Correct.
alternative.
Correct.
Just for record keeping.
Correct. Yes, Ms. Ambrose.
Did not hear the end of the motion. I just wanted to make sure exactly what we're voting on.
Okay, so we'll take map housekeeping adjustments for the single-member districts, and then we'll incorporate the changes on 2A, not the actual boundaries of 2A, but the changes as it relates to Largo, these called-out boxes here. You've got Largo, you've got Seminole, and then you've got Kenneth City. And so those would move into the same single-member district so that the entirety of those municipalities would be in the same district and not split between different districts.
So basically, this is a motion to stick with what we have, but make those particular changes for clarity.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
If I could speak to my motion, it's just the idea that we have the charter and the directives here to do the best we can to make the municipalities whole without shifting anything that would change the balance of how people are represented in the county. This seems like a simple fix and totally in line with what our directives are. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, and it was seconded by Mr. Schultz, just so for clarity, Madam Clerk. Mr. Livingston, yes, sir.
Wouldn't this just be just as easy to combine those two motions, or combine that one motion and approve it?
I opposed the option 2, so I can't support 2A if I don't
No,
support 2.
not 2A. Couldn't we combine, leaving the existing districts alone, but incorporate housekeeping and municipality?
That is the motion.
Okay, so so just so I'm clear, the recommendation list would have the current districts with the housekeeping, with the alternative movement of those 3 cities that we discussed, and then separately alternative 2, as opposed to keep the current districts with housekeeping, keep the current districts with housekeeping and the municipal changes and alternative 2. So instead of 3 recommendations, it would just be 2 recommendations. Is that your intent?
My intent, and let me be specific, and I'll answer any questions, is to go ahead and use the housekeeping adjustments page and none of the alternative 2, just making the cities as whole as possible where we can, and obviously with the exception, because of the numbers, we cannot do Clearwater and St. Pete, but there's no reason why we can't, within the limitations of our directive, go ahead and do the same thing for cities like Seminole and Kansas City.
Let me get Mr. Vos to weigh in, and then I know Vice Chair Matthews had a comment.
Chairman, I just wanted to make a suggestion, because I'm trying to read ayes and count votes. It's just a habit. I'd probably suggest, before backing up and tweaking one of the ones you've kind of put on the list already, I'd suggest perhaps you all vote on this motion, see where you all are on it, and then you all could have another motion if there's a lot of support for it, see whether or not there's support to kind of take off the list that first one and have this substitute rather than additional.
Okay, and Vice Chair Matthews?
Spot on, and exactly what I was going to say. These are individual motions, and as opposed to backing up and co-joining, keep the flow that Chair has already put into place, and we can certainly circle back around.
It seems a lot cleaner to me to treat this as a separate issue and to stick with the 2 we've already voted on. The first one was approved unanimously. If we were to alternate, or if we were to change the first one now, it might change that. And, so I don't want to, we've been really efficient at a very complicated task so far. So I'd like to keep us all on the same page. So Mr. Weinkrantz, you were the motion maker. Is it okay if we treat this as a third option?
That was my intent.
Okay. And Mr. Schultz, you were the second. That's okay? All right. Any other comments or discussion on the motion on the floor? Dr. Owen.
Comment, discussion. So our general guidelines are to preserve communities of interest. I don't see where we are to preserve cities or municipalities. It's communities of interest. So am I missing something in the?
Yeah, it says, further in developing its proposals, the County Redistricting Board shall consider, where feasible, not mandatory, utilizing municipal boundaries and keeping together unincorporated areas of the county.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, Doctor. Okay. Anybody else? We're going to do a roll call vote again. Mr. Everett? Nay. Mr. Everett's nay. Ms. Ambrose? Yes. Mr. Weinkrantz?
Yes.
Mr. Boykin?
Yes.
Mr. Rupel?
Yes.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes.
Ms. Nall?
Yes.
Dr. Owen?
Nay.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Matthews?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes, so I believe that is an 8-3 vote in the affirmative. Okay?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I got 8-2 for nay. I have Everett and Owen. Was there another nay?
We have 11 members, so
11.
it was 9-2.
So 9-2. Okay.
There are 2 nays.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. we're done with the single-member districts. Moving on to the at-large districts, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Spitzer to please walk us through the housekeeping adjustments plus alternative 1 and alternative 2.
Yes, sir. In your packet, there are maps showing the 4 areas where there was a change to the shape of a census block that was along the border of the residence area of the at-large districts. And so if you were to consider something with housekeeping adjustments, we would move the lines so that those blocks are entirely within one particular residence area. Then alternative 1 to the at-large residence areas takes a very different approach than the current plan. The current plans more or less run a north-south pattern. Alternative 1 runs more or less an east-west pattern. And so there would become a North County district, a South County district, and then a mid-county residential area from which a candidate must live when seeking office in, at-large district 1, 2, or 3. Alternative 2 is somewhat of a compromise between the current plan and alternative 1. And alternative 2 runs more or less more of a diagonal shape, less of a vertical north-south pattern, but not quite the east-west pattern of alternative 1. And so those are the different options. It's, with as we stated at previous meetings, with at-large districting systems, you still look at the same sort of criteria, but it is looked at in a much less robust and much less sharper focus than if you have single-member districts, either if it's the entire county as single-member districts, or in the case of Pinellas, it's a mixed districting system. So those are the 2 alternatives for significant changes. And then, of course, there are the housekeeping adjustments that you could consider as well.
Okay. Questions or comments for Mr. Spitzer? Dr. Owen?
No, I don't have a comment for him or a question
sure.
for him. I
Go
just
ahead.
have a general question and comment. So I don't know if it's clear to this redistricting board, but due to analysis that I'm able to do based on my expertise, I can tell you that if you select alternative 2, you will essentially prevent a seated commissioner in that District 2 from running in the next election. And I do know that a fact is, in the past, I guess the previous redistricting efforts in this county, changes were made to allow a seated commissioner to continue to sit in that role.
Chairman?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Vos.
I'm very sorry to interrupt. I genuinely apologize. I just wanted to address something just to reiterate what we had discussed a number of times previously, and I mentioned earlier. This board is prohibited from drawing districts with the intent to favor or disfavor a political party or an incumbent. We have done everything we could to, and as the chairman said, he didn't even want to know, to discourage any inquiry as to even where incumbents may reside, so that it would not become involved in your consideration. I recommend against, in the strongest terms, I recommend against consideration of where an incumbent may reside, because that would potentially give rise to evidence of an intent to favor or disfavor that incumbent. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just felt I needed to jump in on that. This is a directive from the charter.
Thank you. I'm just coming from a place where the public should know.
Understood.
And obviously, the commissioners all know where they live, and they get to make the final decision. So, okay. Any other comments or questions for Mr. Spitzer before we go into the individual maps? Yes, Dr. Owen.
Yeah, sorry, just one more. Again, and I'll stop after this. I really feel that the north-south shape and direction and spatial area of these districts allows a diversity of candidates to run for these districts, and I think that that is a good thing.
Okay. So let's talk first, like we did the last time, about the housekeeping adjustments. Keep in mind, these all are elected countywide. So the whole municipality boundary thing, I think we've all established in our discussions about the at-large districts was less crucial to us. And I don't want to generalize our conversation, but I think that's basically what I took from our conversations about that. So the housekeeping adjustments, current at-large districts recommendation, do I have a motion on that map, the current map with the census block adjustments?
I'll make the motion to take the housekeeping adjustments.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any other discussion before we vote? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Everett? Aye. Aye. Ms. Ambrose? Nay? Did you say nay? Okay. Mr.
Weinkrantz, aye.
And I apologize, we get clarity exactly on what we're voting on?
It's the current at-large districts housekeeping adjustments map.
And this is for recommending it to the commission, okay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Boykins?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Rupel?
Yes.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes.
Ms. Knoll?
Yes.
Dr. Owen?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz?
Yes.
Vice Chair Matthews?
No.
And the chair is a yes, so that would be a 9-2.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I apologize that I misunderstood which we were voting for. I changed mine to yes.
Okay, so let the record reflect Ms. Ambrose voted yes on that motion, so it'll be 10-1. Yep. Okay. Alternative 1 is the map that kind of splits it east to west, basically north, central, and south. Comments, questions, motions? Mr. Livingston.
Just a question. Can we make the motion, or in our motion, can we include the housekeeping items in the alternatives?
I think they're addressed in the alternatives because it looks like they're taken care of. Is that right, Mr. Spitzer?
Yes. For the at-large districts, there are 4 housekeeping edits, 3 of which are handled by the change in the district shape. And I would have to, I believe all 4 are already addressed, but we can include them if it's not.
Okay. Is there a motion for alternative 1?
I'll put the motion on the floor.
Vice Chair Matthews, is there a second?
Livingston, second.
Okay. Any discussion before we vote? Okay. Mr. Everett? Yes. Ms. Ambrose? No. Mr. Weinkrantz?
Weinkrantz, no.
No. Mr. Boykin?
No.
Mr. Rupel?
No.
Mr. Livingston?
Yes.
Ms. Knoll?
No.
Dr. Owen?
No.
Mr. Schultz?
No.
And Vice Chair Matthews?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes, so that goes down 4-7. So 7 would be in the negative and 4 would be in the affirmative. All right, alternative 2. We've seen alternative 2. Are there questions, discussions about alternative 2? A motion related to alternative 2. Vice Chair Matthews.
I'll put the motion out there.
Make the motion. Is there a second? Anyone second alternative 2 for the at-large districts?
I'll make the second for purposes of the vote.
Okay, Mr. Weinkrantz. Any other comments, questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and vote. Mr. Everett, alternative 2? No. Ms. Ambrose? Mr. Weinkrantz?
Weinkrantz, nay.
Mr. Boykins?
No.
Mr. Rupel?
No.
Mr. Livingston?
No.
Ms. Knoll?
No.
Dr. Owen?
No.
Mr. Schultz?
No.
Vice Chair Matthews?
Yes.
And the chair is a yes. So it'll be 2-9, 9 in the negative, 2 in the affirmative. Okay. Those are all of the proposals that are before us in terms of the single-member districts and the at-large districts. Are there any other comments, questions, concerns before we move on to item number 6, approval of the final report? Vice Chair Matthews.
Chair, just for clarity, if we can go on the record to say what moves forward
Yes.
to the commission.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Clerk or Mr. Spitzer, whoever's been keeping track. For the single-member districts, we have put forward recommendations as follows. Current single-member districts with housekeeping adjustments, alternative 2, and current single-member districts with housekeeping adjustments inclusive of the alternative positions of Kansas City, Seminole, and Largo that are outlined on the alternative plans. For the, yes. Is that
Yeah,
right?
the Alt-A plans.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then for the at-large districts, the only recommendation we made was to keep them the same with the housekeeping.
Mr. Chair, does the board wish to consider some sort of prioritization of the single-member district proposals?
That's up to the board. Mr. Weinkrantz?
I would just say we have narrowed it down. I don't believe that's necessary for us to prioritize any of these things.
I don't disagree. Anybody else? No? Okay. All right. Mr. Spitzer and Mr. Vos, why don't you tell us about agenda item 6, the approval of the final report containing redistricting proposals to the Board of County Commissioners?
This report is required by the charter. There's a draft of the report in your packet that we prepared. I will say this, that there's a few typos and grammatical errors in the report. But if you look at the last, which we will fix, but if you look at the last page, there's a section there with a placeholder for the proposed maps. And so that's where we would insert the 4 alternatives that have been considered, 3 single-member and 1 at-large, with a brief description of those maps. And then, of course, we would append the maps, themselves to the memo to the Board of County Commissioners.
Yes, Vice Chair Matthews.
Mr. Spitzer, is there a way to use bullets as opposed to numbers so that it's very clear that we are not prioritizing anything?
Good point.
Very good point. Yes, there is.
Okay. Do you need a motion on this item?
I would recommend one, and Chairman, I was just going to recommend, in the process of approving the final report, I'd recommend opening up for public comment.
Okay. Is any member of the public? Mr. Estock, you'd have 3 minutes.
Hi again. I think the ranking should be what the votes were. I think one of them was unanimous, so that would be number 1, and there was one that I think got 9 votes, and that, that's a ranking right there of priorities is what support they had. And the ones that weren't supported, don't even bother putting them in the final report. Doesn't that make sense?
Okay.
I think
Is that your comment?
as far as priorities go.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay. Board members, any other discussion on item 6 or questions about item 6? And do I have a motion to approve the draft report based on our recommendations?
So moved.
Who is that? Was that Mr. Rupel? And seconded by Vice Chair Matthews. Any other discussion?
Chairman.
Yes.
Real quick, just to clarify it for the record. So what this motion would authorize is the preparation of the final version of it, incorporating the list that you have prepared, and then authorizing the chair to sign it and that it be transmitted to the Board of County Commissioners.
And making sure that the alternatives are in bullet points and not in numbers.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Spitzer.
I'm sorry, but I might suggest that the board authorize the chair in working with staff and council if there are other sort of truly housekeeping technical revisions that are discovered after tonight. Not changing a line, no sort of policy changes, but just truly housekeeping technical edits that the chair be authorized to approve those.
I guess that'd be subject to everyone getting the draft ahead of time. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, and if we could,
So an example would be for one of the numbers in one of the census tables might be off by a little bit, or one of the percentages might be off by, 0.1%. Is that an example of something that you might need to change?
That could be. I don't anticipate that, but that could be, right.
So
Or correcting spelling in the letter, as, there
So
may be a thing
clerical
there or
type
whatever.
changes.
Primarily. Would that be accurate,
Yes.
Mr. Spitzer? Yeah.
Clerical changes only. Okay?
So, Chair, if I may,
Absolutely.
just for clarity, Mr. Spritzer, because you kind of said, I kind of think so. And I believe for the fidelity of those that are here, and for this board, I want to go on the record to say I am not comfortable if there's any lineage changes. Clerical changes, absolutely. Number off, percentage off. But if we're talking the shifting of boundaries and lines, then I am not comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And that's not my suggestion.
Yeah, and I would not sign something that you all didn't approve. So I'll put that out there as well.
And as you suggested, Mr. Chairman, we're all going to be copied on any changes.
Absolutely, yeah. And I encourage you all to be involved as we go forward, because after tonight, we're done as a Sunshine Board, and y'all have been as involved, if not more involved than anybody in formulating the recommendations. So I think it's important for us to continue to be involved as the commission goes forward and considers this going forward. So we have a motion and a second on item number 6. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously. Item 7 is approval of invoices. We did receive one invoice from Mr. Vosa's firm. That was in your email. I believe it was on Friday. I don't know if everyone has a copy of it. If anyone's had a chance to review it, if you want to make a motion to approve that.
I'll make a motion. I've reviewed it.
Okay, is there a second?
second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously. Any other business before we adjourn for the last time?
I have one quick housekeeping point.
Mr.
Oh.
Watkins.
As Mr. Spitzer, were you trying to get in there?
Well, under the previous agenda item, I believe that there was an invoice also from our firm as well.
Let me see, I don't know if I have that in my packet. I don't think we have that, Mr. Spitzer. Mr. Loak, do you have a copy of it? Or anybody?
I do not.
Is it possible for the commission, well, do you know what it was, Mr. Spitzer?
The amount never changes. It was,
Yeah, do you have a share screen maybe you could show us?
let me see if I can find it. Why don't you go ahead with your business and I'll see if I can find the invoice.
Okay.
While he's looking, I just have a housekeeping item. For the minutes, could you notify us, you have all our phone numbers, could you send us a message, a text to let us know when it's up? Because we check, it's not a push email, and to go back and check it every day until the minutes appear, I just make that request. And if there would be a time limit for us to make amendments, and then by lack of response, that they could just be accepted.
We can certainly do that. I'm not positive if I have everyone's phone number. I know I have most of yours. So if you did not include your phone number on your application, or there's any question that I might not have it, and you'd like me to, please provide that.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, on the KSA invoice, we can approve that administratively, but it looks like Kurt's got it up now.
Okay, and this was pursuant to the contract that we got. I think we got the contract at the last meeting.
Correct.
If anyone's comfortable making a motion to approve it, that's fine. If not, we can leave it to the staff to approve administratively. It's up to y'all.
I'll make a motion. Mr. Spitzer said there's no changes to the amount.
Okay?
I second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that carries unanimously. Any other business?
I just like to, would like to make a concluding comment that I appreciate and understand the difficulty that KSA has had to deal with this type of technical data, and they have done a fantastic job of trying to make it understandable to the layman. So I recognize the difficulty, the complexity, the depth of analysis that was required for this type of work, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Owen. And Mr. Spitzer, I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you for your expertise and working with us in a very condensed time frame. I'd like to thank Mr. Vose, Mr. Lowak, the county staff, and all of you. This was our first ever shot at this, so hopefully we set a really good tone and good collaborative groundwork going forward for future boards. And like I said before, definitely make sure that you let the commissioners know your thoughts and stay involved with the process, because it's important, and you've got a lot of expertise and a lot of experience based on your volunteerism and service on the board. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, with that,
Nice job, Chair.
Oh, thank you. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.